Hey guys, it's Colin Harrison with NEI. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a while with a true start to finish with DJI LiDAR. I want to getting the drone off the ground, getting the mission plan, getting the data off the drone into the computer, and the goal is to end up in LP360 with some deliverables. So we've got some good area to fly around here. We got some dense vegetation, we got some ditches, some buildings, a good variety to process. So sit back, relax, and we're gonna get this thing in the air.
So guys, I am flying an L1 for this video. The workflow is almost identical to the L2. There's a couple spots where it's different. It's just what I had to fly today. So just keep in mind if you see any small differences in your DJI app or in the process, that could be what it is. Just feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions regarding that. So I'm in my DJI app, and the first thing I'm going to do is tap flight route. I have all my flights I've planned. I've got quite a few in here. This time I'm going to create a route instead of importing one. So we're going to pick mapping. And at this point, I'm going to zoom into where I'm at. I'm inside a metal building, so I don't really have any GPS for it to locate me. I'm just going to zoom in manually. So this is pretty close. And essentially, to start mapping, I'm just going to tap a spot on the screen. It's going to drop a polygon down. I'm just going to adjust these corners to fit the mission I want to fly. So I want to get a little ways out there into the field. Then I also want to cover some of that road if possible without flying directly over it. Drag this corner over. That looks pretty good. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name it. I'm going to pick the payload I'm flying. I'm flying an L1. This is pretty much the same for the L2. You'll just pick L2. And then safe takeoff altitude, that's just the altitude the drone's going to fly to when you take off. So I'll usually set that really close to my mission height. Just above the trees is the main point. Make sure IMU calibration is on. So we're not going to do terrain follow, but I'm going to go through here just so you guys can see kind of how it works. So you got to have a DSM. If you have the wrong DSM, it'll give you the error on the screen. So you can tap that little plus at the top right and pick download from internet, and it'll download the correct one. So now we're going to pick our flight route altitude, which is just height of the mission. I'm going to set that to about 200 feet. I'm not going to adjust my target surface to takeoff point because my target surface is the ground and I'm taking off on the ground, so we can leave that be. Takeoff speed is just the speed it flies to and from the mission. So I'm carrying a LiDAR payload. I don't want it to fly too fast, so I'm just going to leave that at the default. Speed I'm going to set to about 9.5. Usually with DJI LiDAR I don't fly super fast. About 10.5 is usually where I cut it off, but if you're flying over open ground versus dense vegetation, you can speed it up some. So next is my course angle. I'm going to adjust that because I want to fly along this road, but I don't want to fly over it. So I'm going to try and line my flight lines up as best I can with it. So once I got my overlap set, if I go down to my advanced settings, I can pick my side overlap. So I'm not trying to capture an ortho here. I don't have to run a real high overlap. I can run 40 or 50. I'm going to do 40. I'll leave my forward overlap to the same, to 70. I'll go back from advanced settings, then I'll go to payload settings. I'm going to switch my return mode to triple. This will be different if you've got the L2. You'll have the option to do penta returns or 5 returns. All that's left is this point is for me to save. I can hit my little save button at the top left where it says mapping, and now I've got a play button. So when I link to my aircraft, I'll just tap play and run my mission. Alright guys, so I got the data out of my SD card, or at least out of the drone. SD card's plugged into my computer now. So I've got my drive here, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up my temporary flight folder. So here's all my flights, my little staging area. So I'll go to my SD card, go to the DCIM folder, and I'm going to sort by modified. So this top file here will be my latest one. So I know that's my most recent mission. So I'm going to grab it. I'm going to copy it over to my temporary flight folder. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and close that guy. And I got DJI Terra already pulled up. So I'm going to maximize my window, make a new mission, LiDAR point cloud, visible light will be for photogrammetry. I'm just going to give it a name. Something I can't remember. So my first step will be to pick the folder in question, which will be in my temporary flight folder. So I'm going to go locate that guy. And there's my latest mission. And what it does is it pulls up the location of the base station that you used. So the map will automatically drag to that. So I'm going to go to parameters, drop down my point cloud tab, and I'm going to put it to high percentage. I want to give LP all the data. Under advanced, the other thing I want to do is set my coordinate system. The easiest way for me to do this is to import a PRJ file that I've already exported out of LP360. So a lot of times I'll even make the LP360 project first and generate my PRJ. But if I'm using a PRJ, something that I've used before or pretty often, like in this case I'm in Alabama West, I work there often. So I'll just keep a PRJ file on my computer and I'll bring it in whenever I need it. I'm going to skip ahead real quick and show you guys how to make that PRJ. So in LP, if you go to File and hit Coordinate System Utility, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to pick my horizontal. So I'm going to go to State Plane, 1983-2011 US feet. I'm going to find Alabama, Alabama West. And then I'll go do my vertical. So I'll go to geoid 18. That's what I'm using here. So now I can hit Save PRJ right here. Pick a spot for it. Give it a name. Whatever, just something I can find again. And save that. And that's the file that I'll actually bring into DJI Terra. In this flight, we just had one folder. If you do have a flight where you had to land, you got more than one cycle, you can click there on that little plus, and you can add in more data. So once I got those two things set, coordinate system and my high 100%, I'll go ahead and run the mission. It shouldn't take too long. I'll probably speed through this though. So my reconstruction is complete. I'll click OK, and it's going to show me my point cloud. I don't do much in here. The goal is to get this into LP360, do some finer classification and work with it. But I'll usually look in here to make sure I covered everything. I'll kind of use this as my last check. So it looks like I did. Looks like I got everything out on the west side that I wanted and the east side. So I'm going to go ahead and close it. So here I'm going to click Import Raw Missions into New Project. Import Flights in a New Project, L1, L2. Guys, keep in mind, this is the current version of LP360 at the time of recording. There is a version coming out that is going to change this a little bit. It's going to look a little bit different. It's not going to be too bad. This should still be a pretty decent guide for the L1, L2 workflow if you're using DJI Terra. So next screen, I'm going to add a DJI Terra mission folder. So this is the actual folder out of Terra. If you've done this before, it'll default to the correct location. But if you haven't, so you know, it's Documents, DJI, DJI Terra, and then your email you've used for Terra. Then just pick the folder in question, whichever mission you're working out of. So I'm going to hit that, select folder. And if anything's missing, it'll tell you up here at the top. So I don't have any red X's, I don't have any errors. Looks like I'm good to hit next. So first thing I'm going to do is name my project. And then I'm going to set my CRS. So I want to keep my DJI Terra CRS is the same as my project CRS, which I'll set in a minute. My project root folder, this is the default setting I have in LP360 for where I want my folders to go. I made a video on this as far as organizing your files, but this is the folder I have set by default. Now I'm just going to set my CRS for the project itself. Alright, now I've actually got some flight lines. So make sure everything's in the right spot. Looks pretty good. So my first step, I'm going to turn off that Google Hybrid. I find the LP loads a little bit faster if it's off when you're panning around. It doesn't have to load that hybrid map. Then I'm going to go to my sensor tab and hit auto create flight lines. Now I see it missed a couple pieces that I wanted to get rid of. So I'm going to go to my feature edit. I'm going to select my lasso, hold down control. I'm going to grab all these lines and hit the delete key. Now that looks much better. Now I'll click create true view trajectories and I'll tag all my photos. So now I've got some flight lines. I've got my photos on top of my flight lines. Now I can click geocoding. I could add a clip angle. I'm not going to. I could add a clip range. I'm not going to. Sometimes I will add a minimum clip range if you have a sensor that generates some high noise. But these usually aren't too bad with that. So I'm just going to run it. So now I've got my LAS file in LP and I can start doing some classification. First thing I want to do is I want to drag my LAS file up to the top. It's just what I do to stay organized. The latest LAS file I have, I keep at the top of my table of contents. Now I'm going to switch my view to point source ID. I use this to analyze my strip-to-strip alignment, which on the L1 is very important. Tell you what, I'll switch it back to RGB just to find me a good spot. I like to find me a good spot that has some, like a roof or some concrete or something like that to check my alignment. So this is like a pretty flat spot here. Go back to point source. I'm going to pull me a profile, make it pretty thin. And I have my views unsynced, so I got to switch it down here too. And looking at this doesn't look too bad. DJI Terra has some built-in alignment for strip-to-strip alignment. This is pretty close. This is nowhere near the worst L1 data I've seen. So depending on what modules you have within LP360, if you need to at this point, you can run a strip alignment on this to tie it in a little closer, or at least attempt to. Come here, check the LAS file in question, give it a name, and it's going to build you a new LAS file. So I've got some control for this little demo project we can bring in. So I'm going to go to the control points tab, hit import. I'm going to hit the add button and go to where my control is. Actually, I think it's on my desktop. Grab that. Now I'm going to give it a folder to output it to. What I always do is I go to my LP360 project folder. So I'm going to go to my LP projects, open up my newest project, and I'll put it in here. Sometimes I'll make a new folder for each of my file types. You can do that to stay a little more organized, but you don't have to. So now I can go to next, and you can see already that it's got my points. It's got my 3 points. So I'm going to tell it it's delimited. I'm going to hit next, tell it that it's comma delimited because this is a CSV, And I just have to tell it which each field is. So standard, point ID, northing, easting, and elevation. And I'm going to run no conversion. So usually I'd like to make my control point show up a little bit bigger. So I can just come over here to my table of contents, right click on my control point file, hit properties, and I like the crosshair symbol, and then I make it super big. So I bump that number way up, and then I'll make it a little bit thicker. I like making the color something like this, something super bright that shows up well against RGB too. So I'm going to take one of my control points here. This one's on a concrete pad, and I'm just going to check it for elevation. I just want to see how good my my height hit. So it looks like it's pretty close. I think I'm going to make my points a little bigger so I can see. Click my little golf tee at the top and change my point size to 3. I could definitely see a little bit of strip-to-strip misalignment there, but L1 data is pretty well known for having some issues like that. So at this point I can really get into the tasks I want to run on my point cloud here. So active layer, I've just got one, but we're about to create some more. So I'm going to go by point cloud tasks, tap point tasks at the top, and then I'll pull up my point cloud tasks on the left side here. So first I'm going to smooth it. That'll be 002. You can debias ahead of smoothing. I'm not going to debias this point cloud. I'm just going to leave it be. So I'm going to go ahead and run my smoothing. So my smoothing's done. I'm going to go ahead and switch my active las layer to this las layer 1. This is the new one it created that is smooth. I want to make sure I stay on my correct las layer the entire time. So here it is at the top of my list. So I turned off my old las layer, and all I've got is my new one and my control. So now that I got my point cloud smoothed, I'm going to go back to my point cloud tasks, and I'm going to create my seed surface for ground classification. So I'm going to pick it. It'll be 004 from the list. You can mimic my settings in here. Of course, your cell size is the primary thing you're going to change how aggressive it runs across your point cloud. I'm going to run a cell size of 5 meters. Mine's set to meters, and I can run that by my active layer. So now to view that, I'm going to switch my points filter from all points to ground. I'm going to change my viewing type from points to 10 surface. And once I get it, I like to make a little room on the screen, kind of get it centered, and then I'm going to tick my show all points triangle at the top right. I can definitely tell I've got some high points in here, some stuff that's not ground. I'm going to use a little tool. I've got a little macro called ground seed cleanup macro. It's a custom point cloud task I've got. Reach out to me if you'd like this. You can make it yourself by following the settings here. Basically, it's just going to run in a low ground seed and then a isolated ground seed. So I'm going to run that by active layer. It should run pretty quickly. And I can see it already cleaned up a couple things. I'm probably going to run this again. But if you have a point cloud, regardless of sensor, that has some high noise or low noise, setting up a little tool like this to run before you start manually cleaning up saves a lot of time. So I got it a little bit closer. So now I'm just going to do my typical profile cleaning. So I'm going to grab my profile tool from the top here. I'm going to drag a pretty wide one across the west end of my project first. So I'm going to need to switch my view over here on the left, switch it to elevation. So I can see I've got a few high points. So I'm going to grab my select above line tool. I'm going to drag me a quick line across. I'm going to take these out of my ground surface. I'm going to go ahead and run this across the entire point cloud real quick. I'll speed through this. Keep in mind I'm just doing this for video purposes. I'm just going to kind of blow through it to get to the next step. A little tip: if you're classifying and you got some low noise along the ground, some non-ground points that you want to get rid of, if you hold down Control and you roll your mouse wheel up, It'll increase that vertical scale, and sometimes it can make it easier to pick things out. So that's pretty good for what we're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my ground classification perform iterations, which will be 005 on your point cloud tasks. I'm going to run this by active layer. I am going to set my seed sample distance to 6 meters. I do have my emit edge climbing algorithm on, and I'm going to run that by active layer. So we've got our first ground surface now. I'm going to zoom in here and look at some of this. Look at this road. Look out here in these woods. I can see the tracks. There was a machine working out there recently, so I can see where the machine was working through the woods, but definitely a not very good penetration out of the L1. It is pretty thick out there, but definitely some L1 data. So really my last step is going to be thinning out this ground. I'm going to go to ground thinning, which will be 009. And I'm just going to run this at a cell size of 3, so 3 meters. And then I'll run it by active layer. For me to view this thinned surface, I'm going to go create a new filter for it. So I'm going to hit my little golf tee. And I'm going to scan real quick, just so you guys can see this. So if you look at number 8, reserve model key point, it says I've got some points in there. So I want to save me a permanent filter where I can just grab these. So I'm going to tick my number 8. I'm going to hit my save button. Tick new. I'm going to name this thinned ground. Then just hit OK. I'm not going to because I've already got one. And now at the top you can just switch to thinned. And then you can view your thinned surface. To see what it really looks like, usually I'll get it centered, cut all my points on. And of course this is very thinned down because I ran it on 3 meters. I wanted a pretty small file size to do this with for this little exercise. So now that I've got a thinned ground surface, there's a couple different ways I can export this. So I'm going to go to my export option, and I'm going to click source points. So in this case, I just want to export my thinned. So I'm going to select my number 8, my reserve points. And I know I have points selected because I have my little brackets on the side of my source points button. So my format is a LAS. I can go to my next page, and here I can select if I want a cookie cut by a polygon, or I can export the entire point cloud, which will be just the basic extent. You can also use a feature layer as well, draw you a boundary in. I'll do a separate video on how to use feature layers in LP360. So I'm going to pick me a place to put it. I'm going to go into my project that we're using. I'm just going to make a new folder, name it thinned LAS ground, whatever works. Go in there and name my file. And hit save, hit finish. So another export option, it's pretty easy and fast, especially if you guys are working in construction, just looking for a quick surface. The export land XML10 is an awesome tool. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to my source points. I'm going to pick thinned. And I'm going to enter the number of points I want. This is in millions of points, so 0.1 would be 100,000. I find that that's, especially when you're dealing with a thinned surface, that's usually plenty small enough. Same thing, make me a folder, I'm going to name it. So if we go back to the export screen, we can switch points to surface. We can export the surface as a few different formats. We can do a GeoTIFF, ASCII raster, binary raster. So you could do a GeoTIFF. You could type in here where it says cell edge link, that's basically your grid. So I can build me a GeoTIFF surface on a 10-foot grid, only using my reserve points, for instance, and I could export that. So what we can also do is we can also export contours here. So I can untick elevation, tick contours. I I can pick my file type, so I can do a DXF, microstation DGN, or a shape file. Pick my interval, so I'm going to do 1 foot contours here. I like bumping my shortest contour up, makes them prettier, gets rid of those little tiny contours. Then I can give it a how often I want an index contour, so every 5. And then of course my codes. I'll punch in a smoothing number of 0.2. Makes them look prettier. And I'm going to skip annotation. So I'm running this basic extent, so my entire LAS file. I'm going to give it a name. And I'll skip through this real quick to the contour lines. And I've got some contour lines. This is a pretty flat area, so it's not going to be real cool looking, no big reliefs or anything like that. But now I can save those, and like I said, I can run it as a shapefile or a DXF if you want to throw it into CAD, make it easy. So, well guys, I hope this was helpful. I know most of what we did is really simple, but if you're new to LP360 or DJI's LiDAR options, it can be quite a few steps to tackle. So, there's some awesome videos in the pipeline coming up, some sensor comparisons, photogrammetry videos, lots of cool stuff. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment, let us know what you thought of this video. If there's anything you'd like to see in a video in the future, leave a comment for that too, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. Thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.